Good afternoon. Welcome to the Transparency Watchers. It's a Wednesday, just before the 3:30 hour. We're going to get started here. These are the 13 minutes that are enhanced audio. I think it's important to hear straight from the mouths of Othram. So, welcome. Here is the audio for the 13 minutes from CrimeCon Denver 2025. Let's do this.
The story started with a phone call. Everyone in the United States had heard of the case at this point. It was all over the news. David and I were in bed late at night. It was the week of Thanksgiving. I believe it was Monday night. And we got a phone call, and David answered. It was the Idaho State Police forensic scientist. And he said, would you guys be able to work on a case quickly? And how quickly does your technology work? And we had worked with a scientist in the past. We had worked with them on several other cold cases in the state of Idaho. And so he knew our technology worked. He knew it was purpose-built for this. But he wanted to know, would it work in an active investigation? How fast can you identify someone from their DNA left at a crime scene? And David, being the scientist that he is, didn't want to give an actual answer. He wanted to call the lab and find out what was already in the sequencers, what other cases were there, and give him an exact answer as to how fast we could build this DNA profile from the perpetrator's DNA left at the crime scene. It was interesting that never in that phone call were we told that this was the case that they were inquiring about, but I knew. In my heart, I knew that this was the case. So as soon as David got off the phone, we started calling everyone at the lab, trying to figure out how fast we could do this. Called back and said, I can say that we can build this profile in 48 hours or less. And they said, okay, we'll be back in touch. And that was the end of that conversation. I told David that he should have maybe pushed to talk to someone else and not just let it go. And he said, no, law enforcement will do what they need to do. We don't know what's going on with the investigation. We'll hear back if we need to. So I continued to go about our lives for the rest of the week. My daughter, Sarah, was 20 years old and a sophomore in college that year. She had just come home for Thanksgiving, and we were taking our family photos, which is actually right here, with the 5 kids in the forest right by our office in the Woodlands, when we got a phone call that said the evidence had arrived at the airport in Houston and it was being escorted to the laboratory, and we needed to quickly run back. David and I told the kids that they could drive home with their sister. We usually don't let the kids drive with their siblings, but we said, Sarah's going to take you home, and we need to go back to work. We rushed back to the office, and it's funny, David and I, anyone that knows David and I, we don't dress alike. I'm always in a suit or a blazer, and David's always in a t-shirt. But we both walked in with our green sweatshirts, and everyone was like, what happened? What's going on? And I'm like, oh gosh, they have no idea what's about to happen. And we sat down, looked at each other, told our very small nuclear team that Moscow PD, as well as someone from Idaho State Police, was coming down with the evidence, and that the next hour on with the investigation that said the evidence had arrived at the airport in Houston and it was being escorted to the laboratory, and we needed to quickly run back. David and I told the kids that they could drive home with their sister. We usually don't let the kids drive with their siblings, but we said, Sarah's going to take you home, and we need to go back to work. We rushed back to the office, and it's funny, David and I, anyone that knows David and I, we don't dress alike.
Whoopsies.
No, couldn't disclose to that back to the office, and it's funny, David and I, anyone that knows David, the evidence, and that the next hour was going to determine whether they allowed us to work on this case. We had to do a tour of the lab, show them everything, and it was being escorted to the laboratory, and we needed to quickly run back. David and I told the kids that they could drive home with their sister. We usually don't let the kids drive with their siblings, but we said, Sarah's going to take you home, and we need to go back to work. We rushed back to the office, and it's funny, David and I, anyone that knows David and I, we don't dress alike. I'm always in a suit or a blazer, and David's always in a t-shirt. But we both walked in with our green sweatshirts, and everyone was like, what happened? What's going on? I'm like, oh gosh, they have no idea what's about to happen. And we sat down, looked at each other, told our very small nuclear team that Moscow PD, as well as someone from Idaho State Police, was coming down with the evidence, and that the next hour was going to determine whether they allowed us to work on this case. We had to do a tour of the lab, show them everything we do, walk them through the chain of custody, and discuss the technology with them. And then ultimately they were going to make the decision to leave the DNA at the laboratory or not. That felt like a lot of pressure for me. That was the first moment where I felt like we can help. I know we can help. I know the technology to help exists today. But if we don't do a good job conveying it over the next few minutes, they may just walk away with that sample. And this person gets away with this crime, at least for the near future. So we all just sat down, and as they walked through the lab, did the best we could to try to explain what we were doing. And at the end, they made the phone call and they said, we're leaving the DNA, and they left. And that's where it all started for us. David started calling all of the people that needed to work on this case. And we couldn't disclose to our employees, and often we don't disclose to our employees what case they're working on, depending on what part of the process they're on, because we don't want any confirmation bias in the entire process. And so we just told them, there is an active case, and we need you to come to work over Thanksgiving. Would you be willing to do that? And it was shocking to me, but also very heartwarming that everyone said yes. No one even hesitated. They all just dropped what they were doing for Thanksgiving, canceled their plans, and came into the office to work on building this DNA profile, uploading it to databases, and starting to work on the genealogy. And I looked at David and I said, we've really built an awesome team of not just amazing scientists, genealogists, engineers, but people that truly care about what we're doing here every single day. And I guess something I'll say about Othram is most of us have either been affected by crime or have someone close to us that has been affected by crime, and realize how important it is to change the status quo. The status quo truly isn't suffice. It's not solving every case out there, and it needs to. And so the heart of the team showed up, and they worked around the clock. No one thought about anything else for the next 48 hours. And as we sat at the Othram Cafe, which there's a picture of there, as we sat at the table that I showed you when you came down, we talked about how someone's missing their loved one and needs an answer today, and quickly needs an answer. And it did feel like a full circle moment to hear Stacy tell me that they were missing their loved one, and didn't have Thanksgiving either that day. So in the parallel universe, we lived similar paths.
Yeah. This was one more. This is in their labs.
So this is what happened in the lab. There's a lot of stuff out there about the DNA in this case, and I will tell you that there was a CODIS SCR profile built by Idaho State Police Forensic Sciences very early on. That profile was derived from the knife sheath DNA found at the crime scene, and they entered that profile into CODIS very quickly, and there was no hit, no match. For anyone that doesn't know, CODIS is the database of known perpetrators in the United States. When you build an STR profile, you're building a DNA profile that has 20 STR markers. And when you upload to that known perpetrator database, you have a hit to yourself or maybe a very close relative like a parent, child, or direct sibling. There was no match to the DNA found at this crime scene, and there were 19,000 hits that had come into law enforcement even that early on with no real lead, so there was no other perpetrator to test. And so it was a DNA dead end. No one knew where to go from that. And that's when our technology comes into play. At Othram, we built something called forensic grade genome sequencing. We're able to take DNA from a crime scene and build a DNA profile that has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of markers, almost 1 million markers at times. And so when you upload that type of DNA to a genealogical database consented for law enforcement use, you're able to get really distant relationships, sixth cousins, fifth cousins, fourth cousins. And so what you see is you don't see a single match. You see hundreds of matches pop up. And those hundreds of matches can then be put onto family trees, and you can start to trace back someone's identity. At Othram, we've built software to help us do that quickly, to help us pull information from the public record, and to help the process happen more streamlined and quicker, and to allow others to help work on that as well. And so in this case, the DNA that was tested for CODIS was brought down to us as an extract. We were able to start with that extract and build one of these profiles. The profile was built overnight. The next morning, we had uploaded it to the genealogical databases that we are in charge of, like Family Tree DNA and DNA Solves. We were able to start to see these matches form. And very quickly, we knew that even though the matches were quite distant, people were right about that in the media, that were not close matches. The biogeographical ancestry of this person actually helped us narrow down who he could be. We knew that this person was multi-generationally from the United States, their family was, and more specifically Pennsylvania. And we knew that he had a specific Italian background in his DNA. That's something I think it's important for people to know. DNA can give you many clues. And so the clue for us was how many Pennsylvania families had this Italian background, and there were only 2. And so it helped us shortcut to the part of the tree that was more important for this investigation. We started to give information back to law enforcement as quickly as possible. And then it became very clear that the investigation was going to span several states. Law enforcement started to bring in federal agencies to start helping with the collecting of the DNA, target testing, and figuring out who actually left the DNA at that crime scene. I think it's important to note this technology supercharges your investigation because it's giving you information about who left DNA at a crime scene, whether perpetrator or victim, or maybe someone that wasn't involved in the investigation. But that is for law enforcement to figure out. It's someone that was there at the time of the crime. And so we don't do the investigative part of this. Law enforcement then takes those clues and contextualizes it within their investigation. And so I'm not going to speculate as to how they contextualize all the clues, but somehow along the investigation, they were able to figure out that that white Elantra had Pennsylvania plates. There were only a few white Elantras with Pennsylvania plates or a Pennsylvania driver in the state of Idaho at the time. They were able to figure out that One of those white Elantras with the Pennsylvania plates actually filed to change their license plates right after, 5 days after the crime. They pulled up driver's licenses, they had eyewitness sketches, and they were able to confirm that it was very likely that the people that fit on our family tree were actually involved in the investigation. Law enforcement was able to go collect DNA and confirmed Kohlberger's identity as 100% match to or 1 in 17 quintillion, whatever CODIS gives you, match to the DNA found on the knife sheath at that crime scene.
Welcome to Truth and Transparency. Those first 15 minutes, that is a speech from CrimeCon. I say Ofrum's 13-minute CrimeCon speech there. Did I hear a sketch was done? Because there was no sketch done on the suspect. Anyways, but there's your version of how it was portrayed, how this all happened. None of that is portrayed in any of the reports written by Moscow Police Department, nor any reports written by Idaho State Police, the two people that went down to transport the vial of that they were, the DNA extract that they were working with came in a vial. That would be Sergeant Blaker, and the person that rode along with him, Matthew Gamet, I believe. And no report exists of them checking this lab out and making sure that it was okay to leave this DNA there. None of this is in any reports. I have yet to see a checklist of saying that why would you be checking this lab to see if you can leave it, this DNA there. Again, they claim that they were able to provide law enforcement with their work product as they went. Unfortunately, there was a hearing, and if you go by the sworn testimony of those individuals, such as Matthew Gamet, Officer Payne, under the penalty of perjury, none of what Kristen said is anything that they said. Again, I'm just giving you guys the information. So, but I want to keep this brief and short so that you can just listen to it. And we'll be back here with the next live that will start in about 20 minutes. Peace.